In March of 1921, a Navy ship pulled out of San Francisco Bay with 56 men on board, and by every account, nobody thought twice about it. Routine assignment, experienced crew, a ship that had already survived a world war. And within hours, that ship was gone, so completely that the United States government spent nearly a century unable to say exactly where or exactly why. Here's the part that makes this one different from every other lost ship story you've heard. The Navy searched near Hawaii because that's where the ship was headed. Search teams combed the coast of Mexico because a lifeboat turned up there, and this whole time, the wreck was sitting 3 miles off the California coast, practically in view of the city the crew had just left that same afternoon. Tonight, we're going through what actually happened to the USS Conestoga using the real Navy and NOAA case file, not the version that's been passed around online for the last few years. Let's start with what she actually was, because it matters. The Conestoga wasn't built to be famous. She started her life in 1903 as a commercial tug for a railroad company, hauling barges up and down the coast, doing unglamorous work nobody wrote home about. When the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, the Navy bought her, put her into uniform, and gave her a new job: towing, transporting, and supporting the fleet wherever a workhorse was needed more than a warship. By 1921, she'd earned her keep. She was heading toward a new posting as a station ship in American Samoa, and the plan was simple: leave San Francisco, refuel and resupply at Pearl Harbor, then continue on to Samoa from there. She left Mare Island Naval Shipyard on the afternoon of March 25, 1921, passed through the Golden Gate, and headed out into open water, towing a barge behind her. Her commanding officer was Lieutenant Ernest L. Jones, and like most of the men serving under him, this wasn't supposed to be a dangerous assignment. A tug crew in peacetime didn't expect combat, didn't expect headlines, didn't expect their names to end up in Navy history a century later. Some of them were career sailors who'd already served through the war and had simply stayed in uniform because it was steady work. Others were young, enlisted men on one of their first real assignments, the kind of posting that mostly meant long stretches of routine broken up by port calls and letters home. They expected a long transit, some rough weather along the way, and a new posting waiting on the other end. And almost immediately, the weather turned on them. Navy weather logs from that day tell the story on their own. Wind speeds jumped from 23 miles an hour to 40 in a short window, and the seas built fast and rough right along the route she'd just taken. For an old steel tug hauling a loaded barge, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's the kind of weather that puts real strain on a ship's hull and rigging within the first few hours of a voyage. Waves striking at the wrong angle, a tow line under constant, punishing tension, water working its way into places it shouldn't be. A ship like the Conestoga wasn't built to outrun a storm. She was built to endure one, slowly, and endurance only works until something gives. Somewhere in that storm, something happened that almost got buried by history entirely. A garbled radio transmission was picked up and relayed by another vessel, reporting that the Conestoga was, in the ship's own words, battling a storm, and that the barge she'd been towing had torn loose in the heavy seas. At the time, nobody could confirm where that message actually came from, or exactly when it was sent, so newspapers and investigators mostly wrote it off as unreliable. For decades, it got treated as a rumor. It wasn't until the wreck was finally found that the Navy went back and took another look at that old transmission, and this time, they believed it. That detail alone should tell you something about how fast this went wrong. This wasn't a ship that vanished on some calm, uneventful crossing. This was a ship in real trouble, within hours of leaving port, trying to send word out before she lost the ability to. And then, nothing. No follow-up message. No confirmation she'd made it through the weather. She simply didn't show up in Pearl Harbor on schedule, and when a Navy ship misses its arrival date, the response isn't panic right away. It's a waiting game. Because radio communication in 1921 was spotty at best, and ships went quiet for stretches all the time. A day passed, then another. Then the Navy stopped waiting and started searching, and because Hawaii was where the Conestoga was supposed to be heading, that's where they looked first, mounting a large-scale air and sea search across the islands and the surrounding ocean. In 1921, that meant surface ships crisscrossing enormous stretches of open water with nothing but binoculars and dead reckoning, and a handful of Navy seaplanes flying long, slow patrol lines low over the swells, hoping to spot wreckage or a raft against all that blue. There was no radar, no satellite imagery, no sonar sweeping the seafloor. Searching the ocean in 1921 meant human eyes scanning empty horizon for hours at a stretch and coming back with nothing to report. Nothing turned up, not a life raft, not a piece of debris, not a single confirmed trace. Nearly 2 months later, in mid-May, a merchant steamship spotted something out near the coast of Mexico, hundreds of miles south of where anyone expected to find anything. A battered lifeboat with the letter C painted on the bow. It was enough to redirect part of the search effort down there, and for a moment, it looked like a real lead. But a thorough search of that area by naval and air forces came up with nothing either. No crew, no wreckage, no answers. Just one more empty stretch of ocean that had swallowed a clue and given nothing back. By the end of June, the Navy made it official. The USS Conestoga and all 56 men aboard her were declared lost. To this day, she holds a grim distinction. The last United States Navy ship ever lost without a trace during peacetime. For the families back home, that was the end of the official story and the beginning of decades with no closure at all, no funeral with a body, no wreckage to point to, just a name on a list of the missing, and a question that nobody could answer. Some families kept photographs on the mantle for years, half expecting a letter that would never come. Others simply stopped talking about it because there was nothing new to say and no way to say it that didn't hurt. Years turned into decades. World War II came and went. Korea, Vietnam, the entire second half of the 20th century passed by, and the Conestoga slid quietly out of public memory, filed away as one more unsolved case in the Navy's archives. Nobody found her because nobody was really looking anymore, and honestly, nobody had a reason to look where she actually was. In 2009, a NOAA survey team was out doing routine hydrographic mapping work near the Farallon Islands, a rugged, fog-choked cluster of rocks about 30 miles off San Francisco, when their sonar picked up something that didn't match anything on the charts. A shape on the seafloor, roughly the size of a small ship, sitting in about 190 feet of water. At the time, that's all it was, an unidentified target in a long list of unidentified targets. Nobody connected it to the Conestoga. Why would they? The Conestoga was supposed to be somewhere near Hawaii. It took another 5 years before anyone went back to take a closer look. In September of 2014, a NOAA research vessel lowered a remotely operated camera through nearly 200 feet of cold, dark water to examine that same sonar target. And there she was, a steel, steam-powered tug, roughly 170 feet long, sitting largely intact on the seafloor, deck fittings and hull plating still recognizable after 93 years underwater. It's one thing to read a coordinate on a chart. It's another thing entirely to watch a camera feed drift over a shape like that and realize you might be looking at a grave nobody has visited in nearly a century. Her size narrowed things down fast. There weren't many steel tugs of that exact build ever lost off the California coast, and researchers spent the next year working backward through Navy records, matching hull dimensions and construction details against every candidate on the list. One name kept coming back as the only real match. By 2016, a joint team from NOAA and the Navy's own History and Heritage Command was confident enough to go public. On March 23, 2016, almost exactly 95 years to the week after she vanished, they confirmed it. They'd found the USS Conestoga, and here's the gut punch. The wreck sits just 3 miles off southeast Farallon Island, oriented in a way that strongly suggests the crew was trying to reach shelter there. There was a lighthouse on that island, and a small naval radio station, a known safe harbor for a ship in trouble. Which means the Conestoga likely never made it more than a few hours past the Golden Gate before the storm overwhelmed her. She wasn't lost somewhere out in the deep Pacific on the way to Hawaii. She went down almost immediately, trying to reach the closest possible shelter, close enough to San Francisco that on a clear day, you could probably see the mainland from where she now rests. For nearly a century, the entire search effort had been aimed in the wrong direction because everyone assumed a ship in trouble would be found somewhere along its intended route. Instead, she never even got that far. When investigators examined the wreck itself, the story it told was almost disappointingly ordinary. No blast damage, no torn hull plating from a collision, nothing pointing to sabotage or foul play of any kind. Just an old steel tug, an overloaded tow, and a storm that came on faster than anyone on board could have planned for. Sometimes the most unsettling explanation really is the simplest one. 56 men left San Francisco expecting a routine transfer to a new post, and within hours, they were fighting for their lives. A few miles from the coastline, they just watched disappear behind them. The USS Conestoga is now protected as a historic wreck site and a war grave, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, resting exactly where the storm put her in 1921. And what stays with me about this one isn't the mystery itself. Mysteries get solved all the time. It's the 95 years in between. 95 years of families with no grave to visit. 95 years of search records pointing toward Hawaii and Mexico, while the truth sat quietly 3 miles off the coast the entire time, waiting for a routine survey that had nothing to do with finding her at all. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were the captain of that ship, watching the wind jump from a light breeze to a full gale within hours of leaving harbor, with a barge already tearing loose behind you, do you turn back for the Farallon Islands and try to ride it out, or do you push forward and trust the ship to hold? Let me know what you would have done down in the comments. I read every single one. Follow the Ink Vault. We go where others don't.